Welcome back to The Explainer. So, if you've been paying attention at all to this massive AI boom, you probably think you know exactly where the bottlenecks are, right? We're talking silicon fabs, advanced packaging, the power grid. But the source material we're unpacking today, it suggests the next massive choke point in the AI revolution is actually microscopic. It is completely hidden from the mainstream, sitting inside a compound semiconductor roughly the size of your thumbnail. We're talking about continuous wave lasers and a tiny Swedish company named Sivers Semiconductors that appears to be standing right at the toll gate. I mean, it's wild to think about, but the multi-trillion-dollar AI revolution is currently waiting on a company most people have literally never heard of. To really put this into perspective, just listen to this number, $154 billion. That is Goldman Sachs' recently revised total addressable market forecast for optical communications. I mean, wow, it's an absolutely staggering figure. And honestly, it should immediately jolt you awake to the massive scale of the architectural shift happening inside data centers right now. This isn't just a minor upgrade. We're looking at a fundamental rewiring of how AI clusters communicate with each other. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The next AI bottleneck. 2. Replacing copper with light. 3. The hidden laser choke point. 4. Evaluating the strategic moat. And finally, number 5, real risks and alternatives. So let's kick things off with section 1, the next AI bottleneck. You know, there's a moment in every major infrastructure build-out when the obvious picks and shovels are just fully priced in. Everybody knows NVIDIA is dominating. Everybody knows the physical packaging of these complex chips like TSMC's CoWoS was a huge constraint. The market's already made those trades. So the hunt right now is for the next structural constraint. Investors are looking for that exact spot where the massive flow of demand gets forced through a tiny, unavoidable pipe. And according to our source material, that constraint is forming right now in the world of optical connectivity. Which brings us to section 2, replacing copper with light. This architectural shift really boils down to two completely different approaches. Over on the left side, we have your traditional pluggable optics. These sit right on the front panel of a switch. You plug them in, pull them out. Simple, right? And they've worked perfectly fine for years. But as AI bandwidth scales to these just mind-bending speeds, traditional pluggables are hitting a wall. They consume way too much power, and frankly, they take up too much physical space. Now look on the right. This is co-packaged optics, or CPO. CPO is like surgically integrating the optical transceiver directly onto the ASIC package itself. By doing this, you eliminate those long, inefficient electrical traces because it immediately converts the signal to light right there at the chip. The end result? Just massive, absolutely massive leaps in power efficiency and bandwidth density. But of course, there's a catch. You can't just use the same laser architecture in CPO that you used in pluggables. See, in a pluggable module, the laser lives right inside. But with CPO, if you put that laser inside the ASIC package, the immense heat generated by a high-powered GPU or switch would literally destroy the laser in milliseconds. It would melt. So you have to use what's called an external light source, or ELS. The laser actually has to sit outside the package, and it pipes the light into the chip through a tiny fiber. And as our source material really stresses, producing this incredibly stable, continuous wave light in such a thermally hostile environment, well, it is exceptionally difficult to engineer. Moving right along to section 3, the hidden laser choke point. Now, to understand why this creates a structural constraint and not just some temporary shortage, it comes down to 3 key steps. Step 1, the supply of these continuous wave or CW lasers is genuinely tight right now. Big incumbents like Lumentum and Coherent, they are heavily locked up in a multi-year contracts with NVIDIA. Step 2, the CPO architecture strictly locks in the external light source specifications. It's not like you can just hot swap one laser for another like a stick of RAM. The whole system is built around very, very specific parameters. And step 3, this is where that tiny company, Sivers Semiconductors, comes in. They essentially control the foundry allocation at key manufacturers like WIN Semiconductors. They managed to secure this output ahead of the massive demand spike. It really makes you stop and ask, what actually happens when the AI revolution runs out of bandwidth? I mean, if the major players have already locked up the existing supply, and the technical specifications are incredibly rigid, where does the rest of the industry even go for these critical components? Let's explore that in section 4, evaluating the strategic moat. And this brilliantly illustrates the divide in the current CPO ecosystem. On the left side, we've got the vertically integrated giants, NVIDIA and Broadcom. They have the massive scale required to secure their own private supply chains. But take a look at the right side, the exposed. We're talking about massive players here, like Marvell, AMD's ecosystem through Ayar Labs, Jabil, and GlobalFoundries. Our source material points out a pretty stark pattern here. It seems like every major CPO program that hasn't achieved that NVIDIA-scale vertical integration is routing right through Sivers as their primary or even sole laser supplier. Let's apply Hamilton-Helmer's famous 7 powers framework to see how this builds a competitive advantage for them. According to the analysis, Sivers exhibits 3 exceptionally strong powers. First step, switching costs are strong because of that strict architectural lock-in we just talked about. Second, they have a cornered resource thanks to those early fab allocation agreements they snagged. And third, process power. Sivers uses a highly complex wafer-scale etched facet manufacturing technique, which in plain English means they are essentially carving the lasers directly into the silicon with microscopic precision. This gives them a structural yield and cost advantage that competitors are going to have a really hard time replicating quickly. The financial math laid out in this source's deep dive is honestly staggering. Sivers posted around $33 million in revenue in 2025. But if they capture just a fraction of this merchant CPO market by 2028, the projections imply a leap to somewhere between $150 and $210 million. That is a massive 5 to 6 times revenue step up in just 3 years. And that right there is exactly why investors have been keeping such a close eye on this otherwise obscure photonics company. But we need to look at the whole picture. So Section 5, real risks and alternatives. While this thesis is super compelling, it carries significant risk. And I want to be really clear here. We are simply explaining a documented investment thesis today, impartially analyzing the source material. We are definitely not pitching a stock. For this kind of massive financial step up to actually occur, execution across the board has to be flawless. And as we all know, the real world rarely operates without friction. Let's break down these severe risks. First off is timeline slippage. Mass CPO adoption could easily be pushed out to 2027 or even 2029, which would delay any major revenue recognition. Second is multi-sourcing. Look, these exposed companies aren't just sitting on their hands. They want secondary suppliers. Competitors like Coherent are actively spinning up a massive new fab in Texas specifically to capture this exact demand. Third is general execution risk. Scaling manufacturing perfectly is incredibly hard, full stop. And finally, geopolitics. Sivers relies heavily on WIN Semiconductors, which is based in Taiwan. Obviously, any cross-strait tension creates an instant global supply chain crisis. To see how this all plays out, we have to follow the critical catalyst over the next 2 years. In the second half of 2026, we need to watch NVIDIA's Spectrum X volume ramp to see if it actually drives the expected demand. Then, in Q3 of 2026, keep a close eye on whether Coherent's Texas fab successfully qualifies its lasers, because that's a huge competitive risk for Sivers. By Q4 2026, we should see if Sivers' fallback LiDAR revenue is ramping up. And finally, by 2027 to 2028, we will see if that massive revenue inflection actually materializes. These are the key events that will ultimately validate or completely break this entire thesis. We'll leave you with this provocative final thought directly from the source material. The choke point doesn't care if you've heard of it. It just keeps the light on. The architectural shift from copper to light is undeniable. And right now, the creation of those critical photons runs through a remarkably narrow gate.